Hi everyone, this is the acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today I'm going to do a little birth chart demo for you. I'm currently on the road right now. I'm visiting my mom who lives in Michigan, and so I'm not in my usual office space, and I'm not sure how the picture or sound will be, but we'll give it a go. Um, I know that a lot of people study from home and try to learn what you can from astrologers working online. And I know that not everyone has the time or the money, even with the tuition discounts and things like that that I offer, the need-based tuition, to take a full class. And so occasionally I just try to do some demos like this, um, and show you a little bit more about astrology and how it works, especially using Hellenistic techniques. My next program is in November. It doesn't start until I think it's like November 14th or something like that. You can find it on my website, nightlightastrology.com. The new dates for the fall program are up. In the meantime, let's take a look at this birth chart today. It comes from a client that I saw recently who gave me permission to just share um, some of the things that we looked at and talked about in this reading. And I want to just show you a couple of things that stand out. When you're first taking in a chart, I often like to dry read a little bit for my clients. Sometimes, if it's someone has very specific things that they want to talk about, I won't do any dry reading. I'll just go right in and talk to them about what's going on. But I find that it's really fun to sit down with someone and tell them what I think about their chart or what I'm seeing, and then ask for feedback. How does that fit? How does that sync up with what your experiences in your life have been thus far? And so I like doing that rather than knowing a lot about people up front sometimes, because it's a good way to, once you know something about a person, sometimes too much can affect your way of reading the chart. So at any rate, in this reading, I did a dry reading for starters. Didn't know this person, don't know anything about them, and start off just telling them what I think the major themes are. And if you've seen me on my channel do demos before, you know that I work with three major symbols that astrologers have been working with for thousands of years: the sun, the moon, and the rising sign. Sometimes ancient astrologers would look at the rulers of the angles or planets on angles as well. In this chart, for example, the ascendant is Cancer, the rising sign is Cancer, and you can see that right here. North node of the moon, or Rahu, was rising. Uh, the Cancer is, of course, the temple of the moon, and so the moon is the domicile ruler, or the ruler of the ascendant. So the ascendant and the moon work together, which is interesting. And then there's the sun. So we have the sun in Libra in the fourth house, the moon in Leo in the second, and you have Cancer rising with Rahu, or the north node, right on the ascendant. So those three factors form the basis of my interpretation. First of all, I'm just going to show you one of the things that I did. As I said, okay, this is a nighttime chart, which means the moon is the sect light. It's like the president of the chart, which means the predominating concerns, topics, or themes of the moon are going to greatly color this lifetime. And the moon generally can be thought of as the environment in which the life is taking place, and also the allotment of our life, the kinds of themes, issues, or topics that are dealt to us that we don't feel like we have a lot of control over, and that may define some of the parameters of our fate a little bit more, um, you know, uh, strictly. The moon was related to the realm of fortune and to the parameters of the field of our karma according to our past lives and so forth. So um, notice that the moon is really powerful. And then I look and I see, oh, look, the moon is in the second house, and it's the ascendant ruler. Now, the ascendant has so much to do with the character who will live a life and experience all the ups and downs of the circumstances of the life. Finally, the sun is like the plot line, and we'll come around to the sun in a second. So you've got a plot line, you've got a character, and you've got an environment. Well, anyway, we notice that the character and the environment are fused together very intimately here, by virtue of the moon in the second house in Leo. So I mentioned right away, especially because we also see that the moon in Leo has a very close uh, trine to the midheaven in the 10th house. So there's likely that there'll be ongoing themes about self-sufficiency and perhaps lunar things, that this person's character will be defined in some ways by the lunar symbolism of Cancer and the moon, but that this lifetime will have a lot to do with the need to do lunar things for a living, perhaps with some degree of authority, because the moon is, after all, in the sign of Leo, the sign of the sun, which represents authority figures and people who have some great prominence or maybe are in the spotlight somehow in the world. So lunar things with a degree of that solar presence. And they'll be focused on either owning their own business, moon in the second house, or doing something lunar for a living, but probably an emphasis on making their own way in the world and becoming their own resource, or being forced to be their own resource. Oftentimes in women's charts, when you see this, the theme of being a single mom, or the theme of being more of an independent woman, or even a feminist, or someone who has to fight and claw their way toward greater financial, personal independence and freedom in the world, or someone who may just develop a lot of responsibility, clout, leadership, and success with regard to some kind of lunar position. There's lots of lunar positions, right? So you've got a pretty wide range to choose from, but often lunar positions in the world are going to involve things like a caring or helping field or profession, or maybe something that deals with homes and property and things like that. There's lots of other things to choose from, so I'm just kind of giving you a brief rundown. So that's so much about the character and the environment. Oh, let's look at the plot line. The plot line of the sun runs through the fourth house. So this is a sun that's in its fall in Venus's domicile, and in Saturn's exaltation. And there is Saturn exalted on the lot of fortune in the fourth house. Now, what's really profound about that is that because Venus is accidentally debilitated by virtue of being in a cadent and difficult house, the sixth, a place of conflict, Saturn is really quite a bit stronger in regard to the sign of Libra in this chart. Notice that Saturn, exalted Saturn, also rules the angular seventh place in the descendant. The sun in its fall in Libra, what I imagined was a environment, living, let's say, home upbringing environment that may have been very opulent. This is Venus ruled, or sophisticated or cultured, but also potentially very Saturnine, probably very strict or very high standards or expectations for how one acts or behaves in the world, or what one believes or thinks, especially with Jupiter also in the fourth house. Mercury's retrograde under the beams of the sun, which is not a great sign for someone who may not be able to, someone who may not be able to entirely think for themselves, but is maybe in the process in this lifetime of learning how to do so, as the retrogradation is moving Mercury slowly into the position of the morning star. But Mercury does rule the 12th house as well here, so a bit of a concealed, troubled Mercury in the midst of that. You get that, and you often think of someone who is contained or held captive in their own home by the expectations or rigidity or strictness or austerity of a maybe well-educated or successful but very strict parents or father in particular. Then you kind of take all of that in and you go, okay, this is going to be connected to marriage as well. Okay, so now when I get that, I say, well, what's the plot line? What is the sun in the fourth house trying to do? Well, in a sense, the sun, you could say, is trying to establish a base in life, a foundation. The fourth house, not only a place of parents and family and property and land and stuff like that, but it's also about what props us up, what gives us an anchor, what gives us something to stand on, what props us up and stands us up in life. So this individual may have noticed that the sun is the dispositor of the second house moon in Leo. which means that this need to be self-sufficient may come also through disappointments and losses relative to one's foundation in life, one's home, family, father, that which gives us security and props us up. In this case, one may lose something of that, or one's relationship to being self-sufficient. In the moon in Leo in the second house wants to be self-sufficient, but it may be necessitated by different kinds of losses, um, or real challenges around the home, family, and again where one finds foundational support. And I suspect because of that empowered Saturn, that we're talking about both father and marriages or family environments being uh, confining places, restricting places that um, that also perpetuate one's need or desire to be more self-sufficient and to be freer and so forth. Okay, so now this is a storyline, however, that we can see by virtue of the nodes of the moon. If you look at the nodes of the moon from the ancient standpoint, not the modern evolutionary standpoint, not one of the two is better than the other. So we also have someone who may vacillate between wanting to be really self-sufficient and free and self-determining, and someone who may fall back into the Saturnine containment or container, for better or worse, of marriages and relationships. That both are part of um, a riddle that the soul might be trying to solve. As the nodes often are, they represent extremes. While either I'm going to be alone, first house, and independent and self-sustaining totally, or I'm going to be in a situation where maybe I lose my freedom, but I have some kind of exalted, safe, contained home environment that props me up. From the ancient standpoint, both of those extremes are problematic. So we don't say just go toward your north node or something like that. Both extremes can be problematic. So, but the soul's reincarnational journey may be perpetuated by such extremes. Oh, my happiness is based on being more self-sufficient. Ah, but I'm lonely and I don't feel totally safe. So I'll go to a relationship, and the relationship will provide me with security. That's not the answer. Neither are really the answer. It's tempting to say some blend of both, but actually, in all charts for all times, the answer doesn't exist with manipulating the Lego blocks of our little kingdoms. It has more to do with cultivating virtue within ourselves and becoming more awakening the internal divinity inside of us. That's not something that you can do by adjusting the karmic field to, so that's what we're often trying to do with the nodes in two different directions. We're just trying to manipulate karma to make ourselves feel better. And so again, ancient astrology, the view of the nodes is not, oh, you need to go do this node and get away from that one, and it's nothing like that. So now so this was what I shared with her, and her story, as it turns out, fit very neatly. And remember, this is a dry read. This is an instance of me reading for someone not knowing, their background. So this person grew up in a very strict environment with a father who was a very martial, disciplining type of guy, real strict religious environment, but also family-owned properties and land that they rent out, and father did well for himself. So there's that fourth house, exalted Saturn, with Jupiter too, right? And one, she was not allowed to have much of a voice, had to be very submissive. There's that covered up Mercury down there. Right out of high school, she married. Right out of high school, married and had kids to a man who was very much like dad, actually used to discipline her like she was a child, and Eventually, she got out of that relationship because she realized this is toxic, I'm being abused, and I'd like to become more self-sufficient. She ended up living in one of the properties that her father owned, but her father then started the same kind of dominant, strict, stern watch keeping of her. Well, she went back to nursing school. She went to school. She didn't go to school after high school, so she went to nursing school, became a nurse, and was a single mom. And then, in her own words, married someone because he made good money, had better health insurance, and didn't seem like, like a threat, but not out of real deep love. That relationship over time then soured. He was deeply neglectful and not emotionally available, and very self-absorbed, and literally, in a saturnine way, would isolate himself, and she wouldn't see him or be touched or even spoken to by him for really long periods of time. Tragedy, uh, but a tragedy that happens a lot, unfortunately. Um, Her father then died unexpectedly at a younger age than one would expect a father to die. And right as her father died, she decided to get out of the second marriage. And so the place that she's in right now is wondering about her future, and wondering about next steps, and really deeply considering this pattern of really seeking self-sufficiency, but also seeking love, seeking intimacy, and trying to get away from a pattern of her relationships being places of confinement that she then later feels she may need to break free from. There's a lot more to say in this chart, other topics and other issues that we talked about, but very simple example of the universal signifiers of a birth chart expressing themselves in some of the biggest storylines of her life. So, what's the advice? People always ask that when they're either having a reading with me or they're my students or whatever. They'll say, well, what's the advice for such a person? Well, again, it's very tempting to say, oh, just go be self-sufficient. It's also tempting to say, well, you just got to find the right type of relationship that, these men won't be like this, or something like that. So we see how that polarizes us from that first to seventh house. And actually, being self-sufficient could be the answer with the right state of consciousness. Being in a relationship could be the answer with the right state of consciousness, because the answer is a state of consciousness, not whether you're self-sufficient or you're in a marriage. And yet the soul, especially with those nodes right on the angles, will tend to feel like, well, it's one or the other, it's one or the other, or there's some perfect blend of both. But as long as we're playing that game of trying to manipulate the Lego blocks, we're just gonna keep perpetuating a cycle. That's why the nodes were often depicted as a snake eating its own tail, or a Boris. It's a never-ending cycle if we keep trying to manipulate those things. So any of the experiences of those patterns, independence versus dependence, can be dovetailed and utilized sort of alchemically for the purpose of spiritual growth and the gradual awakening of the spirit soul within. But it really boils down to two things. In every single chart, these same two lessons are the answer to all questions in the chart. One, are you cultivating virtue in your life? Not are you checking boxes of virtue, but are you really working to become the best version of yourself? Compassionate, patient, humble, tolerant, kind, discerning, generous, um, whatever. You can think of others too, but are you cultivating that? Are you working at that? If we're not, we can go to the gym every day of our life and try to get ourselves to feel better. But if we're not going to the virtue gym, if we're not getting our virtue exercise on, if we're not trying, and sometimes it's humiliatingly slow and painful to try to become the best version of ourselves, but we have to be just relentless and just keep trying, knowing that it's our effort that really changes our heart in the long run. It's the effort, it's the care, it's the concern, it's the desire to want to become our best self that gradually makes us our best self. The practices are, practice makes perfect, but at some point when you're practicing a musical scale and suddenly you jump out of your own hands playing that instrument, um, the practice is not, it's not that it's made perfect, it's that the practice allows for you to eventually become naturally good at something. So we practice virtue, and it's the effort and the heart over time that matter, and that's what changes our karma, whether it's the karma of being independent or being in a relationship or both. um, the second answer is that we have to uh, have a practice of surrendering our hearts to the divine, which is, the divine within our own spirit soul. The ego becomes a servant of the spirit soul and says, "Are you happy? Am I making my soul happy?" And usually that boils down to, am I watering the plant of my own soul? Usually that's going to amount to, am I taking care of the temple of my body that houses the soul? The soul feels a lot better when the temple's clean. So there's all sorts of lifestyle habits that we can have to keep the soul fresh. And then there's, the soul likes to sing, the soul likes to dance, the soul, etc., likes to be creative. And then the also the love and devotion to our source. In Bhakti tradition, that means we're chanting the names of God every day, reading, talking about, sharing relationship with God, talking to God, journaling to God, just being in contact with God. And that's something that we have to do every day in whatever way feels, natural to us. But it's also in yoga, it's really nice because there's thousands of years worth of sadhana practices, daily rituals that can be done to help facilitate that, to create like an anchor in a rhythm in a practice. So that's why I love yoga, because there's so many to choose from, and they're very, very effective. And especially mantra meditation, because mantra meditation carries, the spiritual sound vibration, and you share in a collective stream of that prayer, of the mantra. It's like medicine. It really grows the soul and awakens not only the soul, but its inherent relationship to source. If we're doing those two things, cultivating virtue and feeding the soul and its relationship to our source every day, and that's the center of our life, then again, that's the thing that's going to shift our relationship to the birth chart. The birth chart, the parameters of our fate, of our karma, that we're working within, start to bless us, and things start to shift, and we can sense that rather than being a part of a mechanistic karmic law, that we are being cared for personally, and that our destiny is being shepherded in a much more personal manner. We don't get that feeling unless we're taking the personal time to cultivate that personal awakening of consciousness. So that's the remedy, right? For every single person that I've ever talked to, including myself, and any problem in the birth chart ever. We try to make it more complicated than that, and it really isn't. But it's not easy to cultivate such things. And a lot of people, when you read for people, they're not ready to take that up. And so sometimes, the advice, for example, that this client received was very simple. It was just, you should take some time to see a therapist every month, to speak to someone every month or every week or whatever you're capable of, to process losing your father, to process the marriages, to process your thoughts and feelings about these patterns, the hurt that you felt, as well as whatever ways you might have been participating in creating these events. Both kinds of reflection should be happening regularly, in order to help you become more thoughtful about what's really going to make you happy and what you want to do next. So you can't be just a simple, well, yep, just go do this and have this kind of relationship and it should happen around this time. Do it on, next March, but not next May, or that kind of advice is just so much hot air. So anyway, I hope this was interesting for you. Thank you so much to my client for allowing me to use your chart and share your story. She is a brave soul to let us do so, and I think that in the session, like a lot of sessions, getting your chart read like this or reading people's charts, it's important to remember that we're all so human. We all struggle with things that are often um, very similar. So it's helpful to know that we're in it together too. All right. Well, I hope you guys are having a great week, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye.